important nomination. We need a Secretary of Labor. We had a wonderful Secretary of Labor, Hilda Solis, and the reason it is so essential is we now see that the middle class is essentially collapsing. Even though we are coming out of the worst recession since the Great Depression because of the leadership of our President and those of us who have tried to help him, we need a head of the Department of Labor to make sure that everybody gets a fair chance. And I want to thank my friend. He makes a really important point about Republican obstructionism. After the election, they sat around, all of them, and said, oh, my goodness, we have to do better with Hispanics, we have to do better with women. So who are the two people they're holding up with all their might at this point, and I hope they end it? It's Mr. Perez, it's Gina McCarthy, a woman who deserves a promotion, just like Mr. Perez deserves a promotion. So you can say all you want that you're reaching out to minorities and women, but then you're blocking promotions of people who are outstanding Americans. I just wanted to say that before my friend left the floor. Well, my colleagues on the other side of the aisle are focused on several issues which they call scandals, and I'd like to address those today and then talk about issues that seem to be falling through the cracks while they focus on gotcha politics. They're going to get the president. And well, I think we'll start with the IRS. Look, it is wrong to target any group for scrutiny, whether they're on the right or on the left, if it's a Tea Party group or a liberal church. And we have seen this with the IRS over the years. As a matter of fact, I look back to see how many of my Republican friends stood up and talked about going after the IRS and straightening them out when they went after the NAACP or when they went after a liberal church in Pasadena in Congressman Schiff's district. The fact is, they got exercised when they went after the Tea Party. And okay, I hear you. I'm with you. I'm with you. And what's important is, so is the president. So if this president says, I agree with you, they say, we didn't hear you. You know, they just want to fight. If somebody you're having an argument with, I have this sometimes with friends where we're having a debate, and all of a sudden a bright light goes on and I will say, you know what, I think you're right. Sometimes they just keep on arguing. The president said this is an outrage, and he has already made sure people are being fired, and we're going to make sure that we straighten things out at the IRS. So let's focus on how to fix it, not how to make it into a gotcha political issue. Now, we also have the Republican outrage over the Justice Department seeking the phone records of the Associated Press. I myself believe freedom of the press is one of the most important freedoms that we have. And I don't like to see phone records of reporters subpoenaed in secret. And let me tell you, I was once a reporter. So I had a lot of confidential sources. I wrote for a very good weekly magazine called the Pacific Sun. I did in-depth stories on all kinds of issues, and people would talk to me, and they knew I'd never say who they were, was getting background. So the thought of having the government take a look at these records without telling the press is bad. But guess what? The president agrees it's bad. The president says we need a law, a media shield law. And guess what else, Mr. President? We had a vote on this in 2008. It was 51 to 43, with all Democrats supporting the media shield law and all Republicans, save 5, voting to filibuster, so the bill was killed. So how do you then say this is horrible when you yourself, Republicans, blocked us from protecting the media. I believe this is an important issue we should work on together, but it shouldn't be made into a political gotcha. And we should fix it and move on. Let's take up a media shield law again. This time the Republicans shouldn't filibuster it since they're all over this question. And let's get going. And then you look at Benghazi. I'm on the Foreign Relations Committee. I sit next to the chairman. I sat next to John Kerry. I sat through all the hearings where Hillary Clinton, the Secretary of State, said this was a tragedy. These were my friends who got killed. I take full responsibility. She ordered an independent investigation. It came back. And guess what it said? We need to spend more defending our outposts. And guess who started cutting embassy security? Who initiated it? The Republicans in the House. So I think if they're looking to blame someone, why don't they look in the mirror for starters? And now, again, let's fix the problem. I am supporting a bill that will authorize funding for key items identified by the independent review board that Secretary Clinton put together, and it will deal with a number of pieces that they recommended. It requires, among other things, detailed reports from the State Department on how are they progressing toward implementing the recommendations, and it requires the identification of the most high security threats. So I understand why we would look at losing 4 brave Americans as a tragedy. It's a tragedy. Don't politicize it. And where were the Republicans when we lost 4,000 Americans in Iraq, injured 10 times as many? Where were they? Where was their indignation at that? Based on false premises. That war was a war of choice, not a war of necessity. So you have all of this swirling around Washington, and you look at the American people and you say, what is it that they really want us to do? Sure, we should conduct oversight. I'm all for it. But let's solve those problems, but let's move to the issues that matter. Now, I'll tell you what matters most in California. Jobs, jobs, jobs. The economy, the economy, the economy. We just moved off a double-digit unemployment rate for the first time. We're below 10% in a long time. But it means that you got to keep your eye on this economy. You have to make the investments here that matter. Restore some of the mindless cuts that were made with the sequester while you see this deficit going down. And that's another point. All the howling from the Republicans about how this president doesn't care about deficit reduction, we're witnessing deficit reduction. We're witnessing the housing market come back. We're witnessing a lot of good things. Just think of what we could witness if we came together, sat down with this president, and inked a whole new plan for this economy for deficit reduction. And here on the floor, we got to do the Farm Bill. We just did the Water Resources Bill. Let the House get it done. We did the Marketplace Fairness Act. Let the House get it done. And the Republicans, I say to them, they're not here rhetorically, help us pass a budget. You're blocking the budget. You went around the country campaigning against Democrats saying we didn't pass a budget. Then we pass a budget and now you won't finish the job, which means making sure we get conferees appointed and bring the 2 bills together, the House and the Senate, compromise on that and get the budget done. There's no budget. They won't let us do it. But endlessly, they bash the president. Immigration reform. My colleagues are doing an incredible job in the Judiciary Committee, very difficult. Sensible gun laws, background checks, things that matter to people. We're working on that Farm Bill, and I really hope we get it done this week. Last time it died in the House. So, I mean, I have a message for my House friends. Please, do your oversight, but do something for the people that they are asking us to do. Get a budget, get a Farm Bill, get a Marketplace Fairness Act, work on restoring the mindless cuts so we can have more jobs. These are things that have to be done. Background checks. We didn't get it here. It was very close. It would be great if they did something in the House. This week, I believe we're voting on Richard Cordray to head the Consumer Financial Protection Bureau. We have to protect the middle class. Today, I read the paper about some new instrument that's been thought of by Wall Street, Mr. President, that would go to people and say, give us the proceeds of your pension plan, and we'll give you a lump sum. Now, maybe that's great, but it sure sounds risky to me. We need someone who's out there protecting the consumers, particularly in banking and housing. So I hope we get Richard Cordray done. And I thought that Senator Menendez was brilliant the way he explained why Thomas Perez deserves to be head of Department of Labor, but I want to spend a couple of minutes on Gina McCarthy. She has a history of bipartisanship. She worked for not one, not two, not three, but 4 Republican governors. Republican Governor of Connecticut, Jody Rell, Republican Governor of Massachusetts, Paul Cellucci, Republican Governor of Massachusetts, Jane Swift, Republican Governor of Massachusetts, Mitt Romney. She worked for 4 Republican governors. She's not enough qualified for my friends on the other side. And she was confirmed here without a dissenting vote for her current position. What more do they want? What more do they want? The woman worked for 4 Republicans and 1 Democrat, Barack Obama. What more do they want? Now, this is what Christy Todd Whitman said about the Republican boycott. They walked out. They've since returned to the table. I was happy, but when they walked out of that meeting, they didn't come to the meeting, and we couldn't mark her up the first time we tried. She said they looked like sore losers when they walked out. She says if you don't object to the person and what they've done in the past, and they don't with Gina, then you have even less ground to hold this nominee up. And Jane Swift, who was a former Republican governor of Massachusetts, said it was disgraceful. I don't get it. The woman answered 1,000 of their questions. And then when I approached my friends on the other side, I said, you asked her 1,000 questions. Their answer was, well, we only cared about 5. Then why did you ask her 1,000 questions? And she had to sit there, exhausted, answering every single question. And now Senator Vitter says, I don't know what I'll do. I might let it go and not filibuster, but then I might filibuster. Or I might wind up voting for her. Well, you know, the time for all this contemplation has passed. The woman is qualified. The president deserves his cabinet. He deserves an EPA administrator. He made a bipartisan choice in Gina. Gina was brilliant when we had our hearing. Enough already. Please, it's time to have a vote up or down on Gina McCarthy. Now, we have a lot of things to do. I mentioned a few. How about the latest threat from the Republicans? They decided they're not sure they're going to raise the debt ceiling. And so they now have a bill that they lay out who would get paid first when we default on our debt. And guess what, America? It's not you, it's China. Before we pay America's business or American bondholders, we're going to pay China.
Mr. President.
I would yield the floor.
Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I would ask my friend to yield for a unanimous consent request, and also with a request through the chair to my friend. When you finish your remarks, would you be willing to close the Senate tonight?
Of course.
Okay, great. Mr. President.
Majority Leader.
I ask that the record not appear that she has been interrupted by me.
Without objection.
Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 4 p.m. on Wednesday, May 22nd, the Senate proceed to the consideration of calendar number 43S, Res. 65, that there be 60 minutes for debate, equally divided and controlled in the usual form. Upon the use or reading back of that time, the Senate proceed to vote in relation to the resolution. That if the resolution is agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion be considered, made and laid on the table, and all with no intervening action or debate.
Is there an objection? Without objection, so ordered.
And I express my appreciation to the Senator from California, her usual courtesy.
Senator from California.
So when you look at where they're going with this debt ceiling, the last time they held it up, it cost us $19 billion. Is that right? $19 billion over 10 years. Because they played games. Even though when Ronald Reagan was president, he said, don't even go there. I mean, I'm paraphrasing. He said, because even the thought of not raising the debt ceiling and not paying your debts is dangerous for our nation. So now they have a bill that we call Pay China First. That's what it's about. And they would pay China and other foreign bondholders before we pay our troops, our disabled and retired veterans, doctors and hospitals that treat Medicare patients, before we pay American businesses who are contractors. And I understand they had a meeting to discuss this further, and they were so excited about it. What hostages could they hold? They talked about proposals that threaten a woman's right to choose, tax breaks to the wealthy. It's all repealing Obamacare. They've already tried it 37 times. Cutting Medicare. What are they thinking over there? Pay your bills. Don't let this country's credit be downgraded again. I'll tell you something. If that's what they do, they don't deserve to get their salary. And I have a bill that would say, if we default on our obligations by not raising the debt ceiling, we should give up our pay. So I'll tell you, I don't know what they're doing over there other than playing politics. And it is dangerous. You know, we know that they don't care for our president. But he's the president. Show a little respect for the office. Show a little respect for what he's got on his shoulders. Show a little respect for what he's already accomplished. And accept the fact that when there's trouble, he doesn't hide in the corner. He says, you're right, I want to fix it. Let's fix it together. So I've gone over just some of the issues we have to look at, but I'm going to close with one very, very big issue that no one except a handful of senators seem to care about, and it's climate change. And I have to say, it's shocking to me that as this planet enters a planetary emergency where we as close as we can be to carbon concentrations of almost 400 parts per million, which is the danger zone, I still don't see anyone here saying to me, as chairman of the Environment Committee, let's get a bill to the floor. Oh, no. Oh, no. So we're burning up, and I'm going to read a little bit from what I thought was a very well-done piece in Politico, and I'm going to read parts of it and ask unanimous consent to place it entirely in the record.
Without objection.
The amount of heat-trapping carbon dioxide in the atmosphere passed a symbolic milestone this week, scientists announced Friday, reaching levels that haven't prevailed on the Earth since long before human civilization began. Let me say that again. Is anybody listening to this? Scientists said the amount of heat-trapping carbon in the atmosphere passed a symbolic milestone this week, reaching levels that haven't prevailed on the Earth since long before human civilization began. You know who said that? NOAA, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration. CO2 had finally hit 400 parts per million at a key measuring station in Hawaii. And this is what they say. There are few signs that Washington will emerge from its deep snooze on the issue. How right on. They're all sleeping, except for a handful of us. Wake up to this. Congress remains unable to pass serious legislation to tackle climate change. And Melanie Fitzpatrick, climate scientist at the Union of Concerned Scientists, said, "It's been 3 million to 5 million years since the planet has had such high carbon dioxide levels. We've never been here before, certainly not while human beings were on the planet," she said. She goes on. Oh, no, this is John Hoekstra of the Wildlife Fund. "The carbon dioxide concentration in the atmosphere is like the thermostat in your house. Every time you turn it up, we are essentially turning up the heat in the planet." "It's unprecedented," said James Butler, Director of Global Monitoring of NOAA's Earth System Research Lab. "Hitting 400 is just like saying, folks, we haven't addressed this yet." Butler said the planet hasn't seen atmospheric levels of carbon dioxide this high since the Pliocene era, between 2.5 million and 5 million years ago. He said the global average temp will reach 400 parts per million in 1 or 2 years. Scientists warn the continued increase could result in catastrophe. Just let's start off with the 5 million Americans living in low-lying areas who could be affected by sea level rise. And it goes on and on. And Hoekstra ends his quote at the end is, "At what point do we as a society say this is more than we can put up with?" I'll tell you why we're not doing anything. Special interests, big oil, big coal, big polluters. They don't want to address this. For their short-term profit, they don't want to address this. And it is sad, the control that they have here. Special interests have a lot of control. Whether it's the NRA stopping us from doing something 90% of the people wanted, like background checks, or it's the big polluters, who don't want us to do anything about this issue for their short-term benefit. And then, when they're all gone and people are suffering in our country, our grandkids and great-grandkids are going to say, what was my great-grandma thinking? What was my great-grandpa doing? We see what's happening in the weather. It's happening, just look out the window. We see it. And I'm going to put into the record, if I might, my speech that I won't deliver in its entirety. I'm happy to tell you, Mr. President.
Without objection.
Climate change and national security. But I'm going to show you a few charts about what people are saying, and then I'll stop. The cost of inaction will be staggering. And this ran on what date?
March.
In March. The effects of climate change in the world's most vulnerable regions present a serious threat to American national security. Countries least able to adapt to or mitigate the impacts of climate change will suffer the most, but the resulting crisis will quickly become a burden on U.S. priorities. Both the Department of Defense and State Department have identified climate change as a serious risk to American security and an agent of instability. And there is a very bipartisan group. It's actually, I think, mostly Republicans on this, actually, of people saying, do something about this. Our national security is at stake. When there are refugees who are run out of their country, what's going to happen to the world? There already are climate refugees. And there's a movie called Climate Refugees. Danger from climate change is real, urgent, and severe. The change wrought by a warming planet will lead to new conflicts over refugees and resources, new suffering from drought and famine, catastrophic natural disasters, and the degradation of land across the globe. And that's Tom Donnell, a National Security Advisor, 2013. This is a national security issue. And how could the polluters have so much power to overwhelm our national security people? But that's where it's at. That's where it's at. Climate change can hinder ability to combat terrorism. Climate change effects, particularly those related to water and food insecurity, can create conditions terrorists and extremists seek to exploit. Therefore, they are significant factors combating terrorism. Department of Defense, October 2011. Department of Defense, National Security Advisors. The CIA has been telling us this for a long time. We have to act. We have to act. I have to say there are a number of my colleagues here, a small number, who feel the way I do. We're all pushing hard. Senator Sanders and I have a bill. It's the Sanders-Boxer bill. It would put a price on carbon. Carbon could cost us the planet. The least we can do is put a little charge on it so people move to clean energy. Clean energy. And we take the issue of the Keystone Pipeline. It's a big controversy. Well, people say, let's just do it. Well, you ought to see what will come out of that in terms of carbon pollution. It will undo all the good we did from fuel economy. And the oil won't stay here. And they have a waste disposal problem with it. But it's a little bit inconvenient. Remember when Vice President Gore wrote the book Inconvenient Truth? It's inconvenient for us. We don't want to know about it because it is hard to deal with. But we can do it. In California, we're beginning to see more and more solar rooftops, more and more clean power, and the jobs that are coming with it are extraordinary. We can do this. This is the greatest nation in the world. But we're kind of held hostage to the big polluters. We can't. We have to say that we have to act for the safety of the people. And we're hearing it. We're hearing it from our National Defense Department. We're hearing it from Secretary of State George Shultz, who was the former Secretary of State under President Reagan. He says it's a national priority that shouldn't be ignored. Cabinet officials from the Nixon, Ford, Carter, Reagan, Bush, 41 from Clinton and 43 from Bush wrote a letter to us. And Navy Admiral Samuel Lockyer III, Chief of U.S. Pacific Forces, calls climate our biggest worry. That's what he said. The significant upheaval from climate change is probably the most likely thing that will cripple the security environment. This is a Navy man. There's a broad range of risks associated with this. Drought, lack of drinking water supplies. That can contribute to military crises around the world. So this is what Director of National Intelligence James Clapper said. Extreme weather will create water scarcity, disrupt food supplies, harm energy infrastructure, will raise the global risks of instability and aggravate regional tensions. So it goes on. The entire national defense establishment is speaking with one voice on this. And if you just look at, we also wanted them to tell us about what would happen to our military facilities here. And many of them, 300,000 buildings valued at $590 billion is at risk because of climate change. Coastal military installations. So we're dealing with a lot of infrastructure here. Norfolk Naval Station and the neighboring Newport News shipyard, where they build aircraft carriers, they're threatened by storm surges and sea level rise. So I have come to the floor now 3 or 4 times to keep raising these different issues. Tonight I'm talking about national security, but we also saw just terrible tornadoes in Oklahoma. Horrible. And I send my condolences to the people who lost loved ones. This is climate change. This is climate change. We were warned about extreme weather. Extreme weather. Not just hot weather, but extreme weather. And when I had my hearings, when I had the gavel years ago, it's been a while, the scientists all agreed what we'd start to see is extreme weather. And people looked at one another and said, what do you mean? You mean it's going to get hot? Yeah, it's going to get hot. But you're also going to have snow in the summer in some places. You're going to have terrible storms. You're going to have tornadoes and all the rest. So we need to protect our people. That's our #1 obligation. And we have to deal with this threat that is upon us and is going to get worse and worse through the years. So I certainly hope, and I pray over it, that people will wake up to this and that we will start to have support for moving together. And at the end of the day, it's a win-win-win. We'll help save our planet. We'll create good-paying jobs right here in America as we move toward clean energy. And we will see fewer people with asthma. We'll have a more healthy population. At the end of the day, we will help those in the transition that have to pay a little bit more for their energy. We have it all figured out how to do that. And no one will be hurt. But right now, I'm a very straight-from-the-shoulder person. I can tell you it's not happening. But I feel an obligation to my grandkids to be here every Monday that I can be here and just put in the record the problems that we're facing. And, Mr. President, I think Senator Reid had asked me to take out the Senate, which I'm sure people are waiting for that to happen, so I'll do that. I ask unanimous consent the Banking Committee be discharged from further consideration of S-309 and the Senate proceed to its consideration.
The clerk will report.
S-309, a bill to award a Congressional Gold Medal to the World War II members of the Civil Air Patrol.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? If not, the committee has discharged, and the Senate will proceed.
I ask unanimous consent the Harkin Amendment, which is at the desk, be agreed to. The bill is amended, be read 3 times and passed, and the motion to reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the Senate proceed to the consideration of S-Res 149, which was submitted earlier in the day.
The clerk will report.
S-Res 149, designating the week of May 19th through May 25th, 2013 as National Public Works Week.
Is there objection to proceeding to the measure? Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent the resolution be agreed to, the preamble be agreed to, the motion to reconsider be laid on the table with no intervening action or debate.
Without objection.
I ask unanimous consent that when the Senate completes its business today, it adjourn until 10 a.m. on Tuesday, May 21st, 2013, that following the prayer and the pledge, the morning hour be deemed expired, the journal of proceedings be approved to date, the time for the 2 leaders be reserved for their use later in the day. And following any leader remarks, the Senate be in a period of morning business for 1 hour, with senators permitted to speak therein up to 10 minutes each, with the majority controlling the first half and the Republicans controlling the final half. That following morning business, the Senate resume consideration of S-954, the Farm Bill, and that the Senate recess from 12:30 till 2:15 to allow for the weekly caucus meetings.
Without objection.
If there is no further business to come before the Senate, I ask that it adjourn under the previous order.
Senate stands adjourned until 10 a.m. tomorrow morning.
And the Senate worked on the Farm Bill today. Debates expected to take much of the week. The measure estimated to cost $955 billion. It sets policies for farmer subsidies, crop insurance, and nutrition programs. It would cut $4 billion over 10 years from the food stamp program, and it cuts $5 billion in annual subsidies to farmers. Today, the Senate approved 2 U.S. District Court judicial nominations, one for the Middle District of Florida, the other one for the U.S. District Court in Oregon. You can watch the Senate live again, coverage back tomorrow morning, 10 a.m. Eastern, here on C-SPAN 2. And later tonight, an early possible contender for the